My name's Noah Hunter Dorsey, and last year I was awarded Forbes 30 Under 30 for co-founding Fulfilment, which is a network of e-commerce warehouses that do north of $50 million per year. But only a few years ago, when I was 22 years old, I started an e-commerce brand in the share house that I was living in with less than $50 to my name. And in this video, I'm going to share with you the whole journey, start to finish, and what I learned along the way. So let's go for a walk around the Botanical Gardens in Melbourne and have a chat. I think the thing that really surprised me the most on my journey was how things unfolded. I was really into music as a kid, really into videography, but the fact that I got into the skincare market and grew a very successful e-commerce brand in skincare, and then the TikTok agency, and now even warehousing, these weren't businesses that I thought I would be involved in. They weren't top of mind when I was 22 years old, I'll tell you that much. But one project just kind of led to the next. And I've always just been passionate about creating things, innovation, bringing people together, building teams. So yeah, it's crazy how things pan out. I think for anyone that's, looking to build a career, be open to new possibilities and open to different markets. So I grew up traveling around the world, 6 countries, 11 houses, 10 schools. So by the time I was 5 or 6, I was living in Hong Kong, born in the UK, and my mind was really open to different cultures, and I kind of had a sense for how big the world was and also how small it is. So I think that really shaped me. The number one thing though, moving countries and moving schools so much, was adaptability. And I think that that's something that I've definitely brought into my business practice. No matter what room, no matter who we're working with, no matter what culture, whether we're doing business in Europe, business in China, business in Australia, I understand people, There was one trip that I did before I started my first business that was very, very pivotal. And this was a trip around India and around Nepal when I was around 19 years old. And I hiked base camp. I rocked up with this tiny backpack and these low-cut Doc Martens. And the guide that I was with was like, "You're not seriously going to hike in those shoes, are you?" It's like, "This is all I've got." And anyway, for 8 days, we just walked in these mountains. And this was at a time in my life where I was really trying to figure out what I wanted. And I needed that clarity. And one of the big moments, like reaching the top of base camp, was, realizing how big these mountains were and how huge and vast these valleys were and how small I was in comparison. After 6 days reaching the top, there was this moment of realizing, okay, I may be small in these huge mountains, but I made it to the top. And I was standing on top of base camp and I was like, if I can do this in low-cut Doc Martens, I can do anything. And straight after that trip, I came back to Melbourne and the hustle began. I started building businesses. But it was just that moment of clarity, and I think you find that through different environments. I was in the middle of the Himalayas. It's like, who would have thought? But if you do have the opportunity to go on a trip like that and do something completely outside of your comfort zone and your regular environment, and you're intentional about seeking clarity on what it is you want to do and what you want to build, it worked for me. I think it could work for you as well. And now a lot of people have big dreams about what they want to do. And the only thing that separates you from where you want to be and what you want to do and where you are now is action. It's literally the only thing. I think ideas are actually worthless in a sense. So many people have great ideas, but until you start putting in action, and that's every day, small steps every single day, it's compounding. It's kind of like anyone in the gym would understand this as well. I'm not much of a gym junkie, but it's the days and the weeks that start compounding. It's not one session. I think in Nepal, that was really the light bulb moment. It was like, I'm going to stop thinking about this and I'm going to start taking rapid daily action towards my goals. There was years there where there was very little progress, but over time, like I said, days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months, and months compound. That's really how this works. So I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I started a skincare company out of a share house. This was not my first brand. I had a few failed products before this, but this was the first one that really took off. Both my girlfriend and I had acne when we were young. We knew not only the physical effects that it had on people, but also the mental and the spiritual effects it had, not wanting to leave the house, not being confident in your own skin. So the brand ethos was really about being confident in your own skin, and acne is a normal part of life. Normalizing it and then giving products that would soothe your skin in those, moments where it was flared up. And this brand took off. We went from doing a few $1,000s a month to our first $200,000 a month in a very short amount of time. And that was really about discovering Facebook ads and the power of those ads. We essentially built this brand in Australia, and then we launched in the UK. It became very big in the UK. And that was my first taste of financial freedom. That was the first time in my life that I stopped thinking about, where am I going to find money for rent? So yes, e-commerce was really the key for me to getting that first taste of financial freedom. I still remember we were big fans of this clothing brand called Acne Studios, and I just couldn't believe how people would spend that much money on a t-shirt or a jacket. And the first month that Tommy, cracked $200,000, we went straight to Acne and we went on this shopping spree. There was something that was so unobtainable for me for so long. And that feeling of walking into a store and then making that purchase, what it does to your mindset, it's this abundance mindset. It's not about impressing other people. It's more about creating an abundance mindset so you can attract more of that into your life. You get more and more normalized and more comfortable doing these things that in your head were once unobtainable. If there's something that you want to attract into your life, you need to start moving and believing like you've already got it. What kind of person walks into a designer store and drops all this money on designer clothes? How do you start channeling that and becoming that person? And that goes for anything. So I want to take you back to Facebook ads, because that was really the catalyst for me in growing my e-commerce brand and obtaining that first sense of financial freedom. And I think for any entrepreneur getting started, learning paid advertising, especially on Facebook, is the number one skill that you should learn if you want to create financial freedom for yourself. For me, it was really about trial and error. Like, I didn't know what I was doing. I think my first piece of advice though is you should work out how to use other people's money to fund your learnings with Facebook, because it can be quite an expensive thing. If you're spending money without a return, it's money down the drain. But if you're using someone else's money, like if you're working for an agency and running an ad account, or you start your own mini agency and sign a few clients, your learnings compound because you get to use other people's money. If it doesn't work, it's a tough conversation with the client. If it does work, the client's happy and you're learning. And this is exactly what I did. You want to learn content creation, and more specifically, direct response marketing, and you want to learn how to run ad accounts and get a return on ad spend, meaning you're turning $1 into $5 or thereabouts. This is the number one skill. You got to focus on this. And I think, a lot of people outsource these kind of things to agencies thinking, I'll just get someone better than me to do it. And this is the worst mistake. If there's anything you should be doing as a founder, especially in the early days, it's running an ad account. It's understanding finances. I put those two things in the same bucket. You can't rely on some junior in an agency to grow your business. You need to get in the weeds yourself. This is a high leverage activity, and it's something it's even worth my time now in this position. I would still look at ad accounts and run ad accounts myself because I trust myself more than anyone. So a mistake that I see a lot of early stage founders do is as soon as they get some traction in their business and they make their first bit of money, they go out and blow it. They buy a nice car, a nice watch, they go on a nice vacation. And that's all well and good, but in the early days, if you want to grow something big, you really need to get in the habit of rolling everything back in, rolling all your dollars back into the business. And that's what I did. So my e-commerce brand was working extremely well. And like I said, content and Facebook ads were fueling that. And I had a ton of brands around me asking for the same services. Like, hey, these ads are working so well for your brand. Do you think you could make ads for my brand? And that was really the birth of my content agency. And this business grew like crazy. And it was a different kind of experience because the e-commerce brand, it was essentially just me and my partner working from our living room. Simple as that. And this was the first business I started that had real offices, real employees. It was a wild ride. It was a wild ride. So yeah, this was the first business that had people, it had offices. It felt very, very real in comparison to the e-com brand. And one of the growth levers that made us really explode was working with a brand called the Oodie. This was at a time where the Oodie was absolutely exploding, and we were responsible for a lot of their creatives. And the word got out. So as soon as people knew that we were the ones behind the ads for the Oodie, it just exploded. But I think the takeaway here, especially if you're launching an agency or a service-based business, is all you need is one crazy case study. And that's enough to put you on the map. So yeah, that was it. We literally had hundreds and hundreds of brands knocking on our door every month to work with us because we were hiring so many people and growing into bigger and bigger offices. This was my big introduction to leading, recruiting, managing people. And I realized how important people are in your business. So picture this, everyone in the team was in their 20s, young, hungry, passionate, super creative. We were getting bigger and bigger offices. And this was the moment that I realized, the 3, 4, 5 people that are closest to you inside of a business will either make or break your success. If founders, if you're around the wrong people, they're gonna pull you down, they're gonna zap your energy, and you need to attend to that immediately and make sure you're surrounded by A players. So I had about 3, 4 people inside that agency that ended up running the business that were absolute weapons. They were with me from day one. And yeah, I was super fortunate to, spend 4 or 5 years by their side building this business before I sold it. And at the end of the day, I just got to say that a lot of the success of that business came down to those people. I could only do so much on my own. You as a founder can kickstart things, but very quickly you go from 10 clients to 20 to 50 to 100. And ultimately, you're going to need other people to help you on that journey. So a question sometimes people ask me is, how do you find these people? The ones that have that right energy and that attitude. And a lot of my best hires have actually come from connecting with people online, like on social media. Finding people that are posting content about a topic. Like we were hiring an AI role the other day, and we found this guy that was producing all this AI news and like posting every day about tricks and tips and, new softwares that are coming out, and we brought him in and he's been amazing. So, the traditional path of using a HR agency or using Seek, Indeed, yes, they work, but before doing that, I would be really leaning into your personal network and also leaning into Instagram. So while growing the marketing agency, I met my now business partner, Nick, and we identified a gap in the e-commerce warehousing space. So as you can imagine, myself and my sales team, we were on the phone to e-commerce brands every single day talking about marketing, but the same thing kept coming up, and that was, it's one thing to grow your marketing, but when your fulfillment and your back end isn't set up right, it breaks, and that causes a ton of different issues and prevents a lot of brands from growing. So we decided to take matters into our own hands. At the time, I still had my skincare brand. That was the first brand that went into our first warehouse. Some of our friends put their brands in our warehouse. We got our first client, and then the rest was literally history. But it was really just about identifying a gap in the market. We went and visited 5 or 6 3PLs, all in Melbourne, and we got the same story every time. It was run by these old guys that were in their 50s, 60s. They'd been around since before Shopify was invented, and they just hadn't kept up with the times. E-commerce had changed so much, but the 3PL industry and logistics hadn't. And we thought, this is the perfect industry to just bring new, young energy into and, disrupt something. So for us, this was around 2020, 2021, and the COVID lockdowns were happening in Australia. Anyone that lived through those knows that e-commerce was booming. So the timing could not have been more perfect. We were just exploding every single month, doubling in size. Like the sheer velocity of clients that were coming through was insane. And we went from 1 warehouse to 2 to 3 to 5 to 10 to 14, over the period of 4 to 5 years. It's all a bit of a blur at this stage, but you've got to be in it to win it. If things are slow, hang in there, because all you need is that one opportunity, that one wave, and you get that market penetration. You basically break through, your ads start working, your sales team start crushing, the good reviews start flowing, and then it just snowballs. Like the hardest part is like lifting it off the ground. It's like a plane on a runway. It takes so much fuel to get this thing up, but I'm telling you, it doesn't get harder. It definitely gets easier. The problems get bigger, but it gets easier in terms of that just pure grunt to get things going. Throughout all of these years and these 3 businesses that I spoke about, the one thing that I always did was I held my vision. I knew what I wanted. I love being creative. I love e-commerce and product. I like working with people and teams. I like being innovative, problem solving. I like having time freedom more than anything else. I would value time freedom over location freedom and financial freedom personally. And I always just held that as my North Star. And then how the businesses and how everything came together to support that vision, I left that up to the universe. Like I said before, I didn't know I was going to get into skincare or warehousing or content creation, but it's crazy how the world has, plans for you. There's a motto that sums this up really well, and that is, be stubborn with your goals, but flexible with how you get there. That's the key. Reflecting on all of this, going from broke to building a business that does tens of millions of dollars a year, me personally, I haven't changed too much. I still have the core fundamental beliefs and values that I had when I got started. And if you're not happy at the start, you definitely won't be happy at the end. Remember that. So what's important is think about your life first always. How do you want to feel when you wake up in the morning? Who do you want to be working with? What do you want to be doing with all the time? Time at the end of the day is the only true asset that we have. And then build your business around that to support the life you want. It should never be the other way around. These businesses are vehicles for a better life. And I would say that entrepreneurship and following that passion of entrepreneurship, if you've got it inside of you, is the most rewarding thing you can ever do. I hope this story inspires you.